My left immediately, Simon Bryant. Many of you would remember from the days of The Cook and the Chef, or at the Hilton, or as a food producer of Dirty Inc. And the director of Tasting Australia. So welcome, Simon. Next we have Mark Laucke, and you would notice on many supermarket shelves you can see the Laucke product, and there's been an enormous amount of product development that Laucke has done over the last few years, and some brilliant branding and all that sort of thing. So we're looking forward to hearing from one of the only family-owned millers left in South Australia. So welcome, Mark. And to Alastair, welcome from the Beston Group. So what's really interesting about the panel today is Beston is a relatively new business and it's publicly listed. So we've got the publicly listed company, we've got the privately owned business, and we've got the chef and the more niche food producer. So going to be a really interesting morning. So welcome, Alastair.
Thank you.
Look, we'd like to keep this reasonably informal, so if anyone's got questions as we're going along, don't save them till the end. Put your hand up and we'll run around with a microphone for you to be able to ask your questions. So please don't be shy, because we're here to talk about our industry. So first up, I thought it was really useful to actually ask the panel how they would describe the food and beverage industry. So maybe, Simon, if you'd like to start.
I don't think people actually know quite the scope of the value of the food and beverage industry to the state, and I'm sure you'll touch on some billion-dollar figures of our exports. But for me, it trickles down into all sorts of areas. I work for Tasting Australia as festival director, and part of the food and beverage industry and one of the hugest growth areas is actually culinary tourism, and it's basically taking people's money for walking on your grass, and has a trickle-down factor into accommodation, car hire, inbound flight operators. So it's an industry that's embedded in so many other industries.
Excellent. What about you, Mark?
Okay, I always tend to take a structural approach to these things, because as a young man I started off working with the most respected and august men in the milling industry, who are also baking industry. Then I went on to Australia and so on. Have to understand what industry is, and most people don't. So industry by definition is the aggregate of those manufacturing enterprises that are engaged in a particular field, and that industry is mostly named by its end products. So if you're talking food and beverage, we're actually talking about everything that people eat and everything that people drink, and we're talking about every enterprise that's engaged in creating that. So we are talking about every farm in Australia. We are talking about everybody that converts primary product into something that we eat and drink. This is huge. And so when we're talking about job opportunities, we're not talking about somebody working in a factory or somebody working in marketing, selling sugar or something. We are talking about the largest employer group in Australia, bar none. So that's what we have to understand. And so we also have to understand that most people who do work in this industry actually don't understand that it's an industry. They think it's just about them. Most of them actually don't collaborate properly together, and they don't actually help each other in a pre-competitive basis for things like training, development of many different things, even working together on industry awards. So really the thing that everybody has to understand is that there's more jobs than you can possibly think of waiting out there for people that are satisfying and rewarding for everybody.
Alastair.
What can I say? I think it might have already been said. But when we think about the food industry, what do we talk about? We're talking about meat, grain, horticulture, seafood, confectionery, the beverages that we consume. It's dynamic. It's about you. You are the consumer. What the market needs to respond to is what you are consuming, what you are thinking about. So if I looked at the label on your shirt, you'd probably find that it's not from Australia. If I asked you to pull out a mobile phone, I'm sure 90% of you would have one. And on that phone, you'd have an app. And on that app, at least 50% of those apps may be food related. We're talking about Uber Eats, we're talking about Domino's, we're talking about fast food, food which relates to you and your lifestyle and the way in which you carry out your life. We're all busy, time's getting short, food is becoming more measurable and more important to you because you don't want to spend your time on rubbish. And part of the challenge for Australia is to recognise that we are a premium food producer. We can lead the world, and people are coming to Australia to get what we take as being normal consumable products. There is a shift to preventative healthcare, functional foods. There is a definite need to take the best of what we've got and reformulate it, package it, and make it available in the way we want to consume it.
So just to put some of that into context, and I think that's a really good broad description to hopefully help you understand our industry. The value of the industry is at $16.2 billion out of South Australia. Finished food, which is some of the things we've just talked about in terms of what's on your supermarket shelf, what's in your restaurant, etc., has a $6.68 billion industry. Food exports, $3.89 billion. And really, probably most importantly, year on year for the last 19 years, our food and beverage industry has grown in employment. So again, and grown as a manufacturing sector as well. So it is actually the fastest growing and most consistently growing industry in South Australia, which is pretty fantastic in that manufacturing space. So probably would be really useful to hear what's your favourite bit about the industry? Who wants to go first? Go, Mark.
I'll start because I was born into this. 4 generations before me, there were Laucke flour millers. So one would think that I had no choice. Well, actually, when I started working in the food industry, working with taking grain into silos, lumping bags on stacks, I was working and earning pocket money when I was 5 years old. By the time I was a late teenager, I'd had enough of this and I wanted to change. And I was all ready to step aside. And you know, I didn't. And why didn't I? Because I became passionate about what we were doing. I became passionate about creating food that was unique and enjoyable, that I enjoyed. I became proud of the food that I was helping create. And I also became very proud of what we were seeking to do, and that is create health benefits that actually benefited individual people. And also safety benefits that gave people a sense of trust in the safety of their food so that they could feed it to their kids and so on. And so I am sometimes loud, sometimes I speak too long, but it's purely because of the passion that grew in me just by being involved in the industry. And so all I would say is I have never yet met anybody in my own organisation or any other food organisation who hasn't actually become passionate about food, because it is the most primal of all things to humans. The first thing that humans did to sustain themselves is to seek out and create food. It is embedded within us that we must eat food. Wars were created because people needed to have land to create food for themselves. It brings out the best and the worst in us. I've got to say, mostly it always brings out the best in us. And so I just love that. And there's nothing I enjoy more than spending time with people, enjoying food, talking about food, and then after that, helping other people and myself create food that people really enjoy. And that's my passion.
And I concur with that entirely. It's a very passionate industry and everybody does really love what they do. Did either of you want to add a comment about your favourite bit of the industry?
Well, if I may, growing up on a dairy farm in New Zealand in the Waikato put me right in contact with the dairy industry, and it's an area segment that I've followed throughout my life. It's from within Beston, it's an area that we're growing out. We certainly have probably about 5% of the state's milk supply coming through our factories from our own farms. We've got another 100 million litres which we've contracted in, and that's to feed our cheese industry, and in particular mozzarella. We're in the process of investing about $15 million in a new mozzarella plant. Why? Because that app on your phone connects you to Domino's. What do you buy at Domino's? Pizzas. What's on pizza? Mozzarella cheese. So the direct relationship between what we consume, what we grow, and how we use our time. So the whole dairy industry is really exciting. I spent some time at the University of Adelaide in their commercialisation division, and which really fired my senses up about the way in which we commercialise, how we can value add, how we can put together products to meet a market demand. And certainly in meeting market demand, we need to understand where the market is. We recently launched a range of cheese into Malaysia. It's Kaibu cheese. We said, forget about what we think about cheese, forget about the cheddars and the mozzarellas. What does the market want? So we got the market feedback. We've now got cheese going into Malaysia, Singapore and other countries, which involves chocolate cheese, strawberry cheese, vanilla cheese, something which is kind of in your face. But that's what gets exciting, because it's not really what we think should be produced, it's what people will pay to consume. And that's part of the excitement, to taking a raw product from the dairy regional areas which need growth and need reinvestment and stimulation, using that raw product, putting it through our factories, formulating it and feeding it to people who will pay a premium. And it's a lovely story, and it's a lovely feeling to be a creator of benefit.
Excellent. Simon, how did you get involved in the industry?
By mistake. I was sort of, it's really interesting because in South Australia, if you look at our scorecards, 1 in 5 people are employed in hospitality, but actually everyone you meet has probably worked in hospitality at some stage or another, and most of that is when you're studying or when you're at school and you just want a little bit of extra money stacking the shelves at Coles or whatever. But that's how I got into hospitality while I was at uni, to pay my HECS fees. And it's really interesting. I've been in hospitality, 30, 35 years, whatever it is. And the people that I've known for that amount of time have changed roles and jobs, but they're still in hospitality. And that's probably the beauty of the industry, that someone that was a busboy in 1980 or a chef in 1990 is now a CEO of whatever to do with, it's still in the industry. So the networks and the ability to change jobs when you're sort of fed up with your role, and even if that's going into a commerce because you were a waiter and you were in a big hotel like this or a big convention centre, they've got an accounts department with 50 people and they'll train you. And so I think it's really, it's a good career stream if you're not 100% sure on where you want to specialise, because you can end up anywhere, and the skills are very transferable, and they're also transferable across countries. It's a great ticket to travel.
Excellent. Mark, you've really touched on how you got involved. Did you want to add one more thing?
I want to just move on a bit.
Okay.
So my favourite part of the food and beverage industry is, within Australia, the internationalism that we have here. I've travelled all over the world seeking out information, trying to sell products, all that. From my perception, we have got a wider spread of nationalities living, residing, consuming and creating food in Australia than any other country in the world. Some come close, but mostly that Australia has got the widest representation of nationality groups and people prepared to cater to their food desires and wants, as Alastair said. It's what consumers want. So really, I just want to touch on markets. Now, markets are most often, like industry, misunderstood. You have to understand what a market is. A market is not a geographic region. A market is in fact a group of people who think the same way about something. So if you start thinking of market sectors, Australia has got market sectors of all sorts, sometimes based on affluence, sometimes based on their regional origins as to what sort of food they like. It's the same overseas as well. So if you understand people and you understand groups of people who think the same way, you say, aha, there's a market sector. What do they want? How do we seek to satisfy them? And I've got to say that we have an opportunity in Australia, and especially in South Australia, to be able to add value to the food products that we create and take them to people and make a very good living out of it. The major problem we've got, actually, and we'll talk about it later, is finding enough human resources to do it.
So, Alastair, how important is the food and beverage industry to South Australia in your view?
Oh, critical. We need to work to our strengths as a state. You might say we have fewer of those opportunities than other states, but what we do have since the establishment of the state is our food, our wine, and our capability to use our resources. The whole, we've got the capacity through our universities, through the dynamic companies that we have within the state, to really gear up, value add, create the opportunities through food to be able to make that a driver for the state. We've got a diverse population, as pointed out, and I think in Australia we've got a total of, I think, of about 140 nationalities, and a good part of those nationalities are here in South Australia. We have the opportunity to match the best of our food, fresh, green food, which is non-chemical based, which is not genetically modified, to formulate it in such a way that it can be consumed not necessarily here, but offshore. In this age of digitalisation, being able to take information, find it on your phone, on your laptop, iPod, it is about connecting people and connecting flavours and where those flavours come from. So, taken as a whole, South Australia is well positioned to take the best of its natural resources, put them together and take them to the market.
Does anyone else want to add to that particular question?
We're bouncing around a little bit, but that's fine. I think we should follow the thread, and then Catherine will keep us on track. We have to understand that there is a fundamental difference between how we perceive food in Australia and how people in most other countries and most people in the world perceive their food. We trust our food. And that's based on a long history where Australia's made some small mistakes in the past, and the Australian government has led initiatives to make sure that we do create safe food. So every food processor in Australia is independently audited and inspected against specific standards, not just seafood, everything. So we don't even think about, as Australians, when we buy food in Australia, whether that food is safe for us. We trust that it's safe. We might worry about the quality, we might worry about the price, but safety is assured. However, in the largest population groups in the world, think of China, they know that 70% of their farmland is polluted, and in fact most of them believe 100% is polluted. They don't trust their own food. That is a great opportunity for Australians and South Australia especially. And so if we recognise that market, if we consider what they want, and if we move to do it, then we can become even more successful. And that's what we're trying to do. As I said, the major hold-up is not now the fact that people in the rest of the world trust our food. By the way, I can tell you, the research has been done. Australia holds the pinnacle. We are the top of the triangle regarding perceptions of quality and safety in the world. So we should be doing our absolute best to take advantage of it. We're a little bit slow and lazy about that. The main reason is that we actually don't understand that because we trust our own food. Okay? So start understanding now what the market wants, what other consumers want in other parts of the world. That's the fantastic opportunity for individuals and businesses here in Australia.
Great.
Could I just add an example to that? Mount Gambier, most of you may be coming from Mount Gambier or know Mount Gambier, that beautiful blue lake. But the water coming through that lake comes from the Grampians. That's 40 million years of filtration through underground reservoirs to get through to that lake. That water is very reasonably volcanic. It's got a pH of about 8. As a company, we've invested in a company about 3 kilometres away from that lake called Acquiescence. So that water, which we take for granted, which we normally just drink and comes out of the tap, because it's volcanic, because it's got a pH of 8, stands apart in the markets that we're now putting that water into. We've actually, as of this week, that water under the Aqua 8 label has been used in China in the national swimming competition, and it's been recognised along with to a television audience of a significant number, pick a number, but it's quite large. But there's a brand from South Australia representing a product which comes from a food or natural resource which we take for granted. Hopefully that will sell, that'll bring money back into Mount Gambier, and from a regional development point of view, that'll encourage and reinvest back benefits to the state.
This one's, I think, sorry, yes, question. Just.
Is it working?
Yep.
Hello, guys. I got a question. I'm a chef myself, and I'm wondering why nothing is really happening here, especially in Adelaide. You mentioned the beautiful produce, which I totally agree with all of you guys. But then everyone speaks about the restaurants in Melbourne, Sydney. You hardly don't hear anyone on all those fancy food magazines. Recently in Adelaide opened this and that restaurant. I've been living now and working here for 10 years. I'm one of those 110 different nationalities because I really enjoy being here. And this is a big mysterium. Even chef from, like I think, what's it called, Fast Ed, I asked him once about in a cooking demonstration, what is his opinion about the situation. He said, I don't understand. It's a mysterium for me myself. Do you got any idea where this come from? But no one really is coming to Adelaide, introducing or incorporating the beautiful produce, and is not making a first-class restaurant scene out of it. To use that as an advertisement for SA as well.
So I might, Simon, you can answer that in a sec. One thing I'd just like to make a point of, we've run a program called Eat Local South Australia for the last few years, and the purpose of that program is for people coming in from interstate, overseas, or even locals to actually experience the real local food, particularly in regions, in restaurants, and to try to raise the bar and give them a bit of an experience. So there's that element about promoting the industry. Arana recently won the Gourmet Traveller Best Restaurant Award, which I think, again, will really enhance the reputation of South Australia, because there's no doubt once people come here, go to restaurants, taste a lot of local food, because we're quite parochial, they love it. So that's another thing that's actually quite significant. We do suffer from the Eastern Seaboard thinking that they're better than us, but you know, we're a hidden gem, and there is some momentum happening. And I mean, remember back in the 80s, and you may not have been here, you know, one of Simon's former bosses, Chong Lu, was very well-known, famous, and you know, there was Anne Oliver, who was really sort of stretching the limits on food as well. So we have got that history of it, but I might throw to you now, Simon.
It's a pretty relevant question, but I've been around long enough. I was in Melbourne when it was second fiddle to Sydney. It's actually like Premier League football, to be honest. There's a lot of marketing. Some of it's about inbound overseas traffic and flight routes and where people are spending their dollars. And in Sydney, it used to be not unusual that you couldn't get a restaurant off the ground for under $3 million. You'd need a fit out the front of about 1.5 just to people wouldn't even be impressed with that. We simply don't have the economies of scale here to support that. The food media is concentrated on the eastern seaboard and is owned by 2 companies predominantly. If you look at the ownership of what people are reading, Condé Nast and Gourmet Traveller and whatever, the food capital moved to Melbourne because it's just empires, like I said, like Premier League football teams. They get to a stage where they need to build a new stadium, or their signings are not returning the investment they need, or whatever, and it's just an endless cycle. We had it in the 70s, early 80s. It went to Sydney, it moved to Melbourne, and it's coming back to Adelaide, and it's a little sad that it's that pathetically predictable, but it is the truth. The problem is how to actually capitalise on that and maintain it. And I think the biggest danger is that we run around saying we're the food capital and everyone comes here and they tick it off their list. And it's a bit like the basket range wines at the moment. Everyone's coming from Melbourne to drink natural wines in the Adelaide Hills. They tick it off their list and they never come back. So it's about building a sustainable long-term business model that's not based on fads and crazes. And that's really, really hard to do when you've got the food media involved, because as soon as they've written about it, it's over. And that's our challenge.
Well, that's really nice. Thanks for the question. Nice segue into our next question about how the industry interacts with tourism, hospitality and wine. And Simon, maybe from your perspective about Tasting Australia as well, it'd be good for you to talk about that. So
there's a finite amount of resources, and there's a certain need for commodity product. We all understand that. For export, the vast majority of our goods go to commodity export. They're a price that farmers aren't particularly happy with. They're a huge volume, and they are the backbone of probably what repays your loans to the bank as a producer. But the biggest growth market is the functional and luxury food product sector, because what that basically means, and I'm not into marketing and all that hoo-ha, but it's putting your product with a unique selling point, a niche, and a point of difference that actually is credible and real, not just a heap of advertising hoo-ha. And our product, as the panel's pointed out, GM-free, largely clean in the broader sense, and I'm not going to whittle down to biodynamic this and organic that and whatever. The South Australian products are perceived as Mark said, clean, and that'll do for marketing terms. And what that enables you to do if you play in that niche is, even if your growth falls down in gross food export tonnage, your dollar value goes up. And we saw that happen with the wine industry last year. The gross tonnage went down, but the value to the state went up. That's the game we want to be playing. But there's a finite number of grapes and vines and wheat, and the biggest growth industry for us, and it's the education model, is education's a great export because it's pretty well infinite if you can build the infrastructure to back it up. Overseas students, and culinary tourism is a similar prospect, that people go and pay homage to a wine in Bordeaux. They only drink that much wine, so you've got all these people making wine and you've got a resource that's finite, but the rest of the experience is, I said it before, walking on grass. We're selling the privilege of walking on our grass, and that's what Tasting Australia is trying to cultivate a marketplace around, is culinary tourism, that you actually physically take a few objects from us that are finite, but we charge you for a bucket load of other stuff that's infinite, just to breathe our air, pretty much. So it's a long-term goal, I guess, for the state when we reach production capacity, which is a long time away, but it's a good mixed business model of how to make food revenue.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe to the panel, what sets South Australia apart from other states and other countries? I mean, we've sort of touched on it through the conversation, but maybe if you could give us some more insights on that.
Well, one thing which stands out in my mind is that as a state, we have more independent food retailers and distributors here than other states, which tend to have the monopoly, the Coles, the Woolies, and now the new Aldi's coming in. But look, I think it's about 48% of the places that you buy food from are owned by the Romeos and the IGOs, the Foodlands. And they give new innovators in food and new companies who are manufacturing food or putting food into the market the opportunity to put product on the shelf. Those opportunities wouldn't happen in Melbourne or Sydney, where there may be 400,000 SKUs on a shelf in a supermarket. They're not going to look after the little guy. Or if they will, it'll come at a price and on terms which aren't necessarily workable. So we, as a state, we can foster young, innovative companies, food companies, who want to get into the market space. And from my point of view, I think it's a wonderful thing that we can do to foster those opportunities.
Yeah, they certainly live the mighty South Aussie theme, don't they?
They certainly do.
Can I just speak to that as well, because I've got a unique perspective here, probably better than anybody else, because I can give you some good examples. It's all about people. So start with history. South Australia was the first state of Australia where people were allowed to own land and own what they created from that land. First state. In New South Wales, everything was government owned, government controlled. That's history. Okay. So we started with a food industry in South Australia before any other state in Australia. That created a sense of entrepreneurship that persists even today. It's embedded in our culture as people. It's not obvious, but it's there, because I do business in every state of Australia, and I can tell you South Australia is different. It finds ways. Why does it find a way? Because it needs to, actually, because it's got less human resources, it's got less land resources, less mineral resources, and so on and so on and so on. So we have to do it. Food is actually our best opportunity. It was our first opportunity, and it continues to be our best opportunity. So if you now think about the example I'm going to tell you about, and I think this is actually a very good one. I want to see those in the audience who've heard of Gregor Mendel, the Austrian monk, and his experience with peas that told us and him all about genetics and DNA. Hands up.
That's very impressive.
Good. Okay. So an Austrian monk in the 1800s, by studying field peas, one of the most simple of all plants, worked out how it is that sex operates, DNA transfers, and how it gets expressed, and the traits of what we all are works. They didn't have the internet in those days, and funnily enough, an expat Englishman came to Australia for his health, and he got interested in plant breeding, and he set up in his wife's kitchen a laboratory for testing wheat, and set up a laboratory for testing the quality of the end product. He was baking loaves of bread. This is in the late 1800s. Never been done in the world before. He actually worked out the principle of genetics based upon wheat breeding. Wheat is the most complex genome in the world. It is 5 times more complex than the human genome. Why? A freak of nature. If it was created today, it'd be called a GMO. It's got a double DNA helix. Yes? Yeah, heaps more chromosomes. But, so without trying to overdo this man, William Farrer, worked it out. All of the people in the eastern states who were comfortable, he threatened them. All of the fraternity of plant breeders and government functionaries, he threatened them because he brought something new as an innovation. The people in South Australia heard about it and went over there and got to know him, and they shared information amongst themselves. When he died, no one from the eastern states worried. The South Australian people from Roseworthy Agricultural College and Waite Research Institute, they went straight to his widow and said, can we have all of his research and his papers? And she said, please take it, get it out of my kitchen. That has set in itself Australia, South Australia, leading plant breeding in Australia and the rest of the world. We still continue that today. So we've got lots of strengths based upon our history, and we've got lots of opportunities because we have to do it in food. The other states get the idea, but they don't have to do it, so they don't. We have to do it. So there it is. The opportunity is here. And the entry points are lower, as Simon said. It's not so expensive to set up a small business in South Australia. You can start one yourself in the food industry with almost nothing, and most people do. And you've got to say that business is actually a numbers game. I remember reading once that 95% of all businesses fail in the first year because they don't organise their accounting properly. Well, I don't know whether it's fact or fiction, but it does give you an indication that the more people that start business, the best ones will always survive. Darwinian evolution type. You'll survive more easily in South Australia because there's more people like you who are entrepreneurs who collaborate and help together. The hurdles are easier to overcome, and you will succeed in South Australia as I've done, and you will grow to become a national and then an international trading people if you're passionate and display energy.
Excellent. Now, we're at JobX. What are some of the job opportunities in the food industry? I'd like to hear from each of you.
I'll answer that partially. That is anyone considering going into the food and beverage job market? And what sort of area do you know?
I'm focusing on front of house and like working up to management in the future for that sort of side of things.
Hospitality?
Yeah, hospitality in front of house.
Look, I don't know what, I'm an old bastard now, but when I was at school, they gave you something called the WEA guide, which was a newspaper of like jobs, and you look through it and you go, oh, yeah, I want to be an accountant. And that's the score you need in your matric, it was called back then. And that's about all we knew about jobs. It's mind-bogglingly confusing if you're considering a career, but what is the beauty of hospitality is that it doesn't matter where you start, you'll end up where you're meant to be, because it covers just about every bit. In one day of my work yesterday, I would have spoken to a farmer, an accountant, a winemaker, a restaurant owner, a dishy. It goes on and on and on. So they say 1 in 5 South Australians is employed in food and beverage. They are. But it's so diverse, and it doesn't matter where you start. Don't worry about the job that you're chasing. It's the industry. Chase the industry and the job will sort itself out later. And you can always retrain their transferable skills. And most of the big players in the food and beverage industry will pay for you to be retrained, to swap jobs within the industry. So, you know, it's a pretty good place to start if you don't know what you're doing. Sounds like you know what you're doing, though.
I wanted to know what made you first start to be a chef? Like,
accident. Like, I thought I'm a motor mechanic by trade. I'm nearly an economist. I have a couple of units to finish at uni, but the 9-year rules run out on me. But I just needed a job. But you know, there's no romance, no, oh, I always wanted to cook when I was little because my grandma did. No bullshit like that. I just needed a job, and I really like it. And I also think that if you know, one word of advice about chefing, are you interested in?
Well, currently, like, I'm front of house, but I've been a kitchen hand, and, you know, you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen, so I've been with a chef like Gordon Ramsay, so that kind of got me back to front of house. But seeing a chef like you and other, was it Chow? I've worked with him, so.
Well, dishes make the best chefs, because I honestly believe...
I wanted to get experience all around the area, so once I run and manage the place, I can have full knowledge of
Yeah, and
everything.
that's the way to play it. That honestly, I washed dishes for a number of years, and then someone falls over one night, drunk or injured, and they say, hey, Dishy, do the fish section, and you're like, huh? And you do it. And then they send you off to TAFE, and, you know, it all just sort of works out for you. But one word of caution that I'll always say is, if you're really, really passionate about something, that's awesome. Keep it as a freaking hobby, because when it becomes your job, it's not the romance that's on TV shows. You know, I've got a whole heap of contact dermatitis today from killing marrons yesterday, and a very sore back from working in the worst kitchen in the world last night, with no room in the cool room, and I'm tired because I didn't finish the dishes till 3 in the morning. That's the reality of the job.
And he's grumpy.
And I'm grumpy.
I finished at midnight last night, and I got to go back to work later. So.
And you know, I think people over-glamorise the industry. It's not that exciting. 90% of the day, I'm just like peeling carrots or simmering a stock. You know, it's not that TV rubbish. So if you're truly passionate and you speak to anyone about this, don't kill your passion. If you love, it's about stamina, it's about resilience, it's about always wanting to learn. That passion bit, I think, is a little overrated, because I speak to guys in bands and they hate their guitar because they made it their job.
Saying that, what is your passion then?
Oh, and that's the
He loves what he does.
No, I do like what I do, but I don't overrate it. I know the reality that my feet bloody hurt. I've had my varicose veins done. I was in the ward with all of the grannies. You know, that's pretty glamorous.
We just had our head chef have a back operation for
exactly
standing on your feet for like 14 hours.
That's the reality of the industry, and I think it's really important to be interested in everything in life. I read a lot. I love dogs. I like driving way too fast in stupid cars. If you put all of your interest and enthusiasm in one thing, I've known so many chefs that are just so immersed in the industry. All they do is eat at other restaurants or cook in their own or read, and they burn out. It's important to have a wide range of interests, and I really can't emphasise more. If you love cooking, that's fine, but don't put all your chips on it.
Thank you for that.
Question.
Just to add a little bit more to that, I've got to say, from my own perspective, I totally agree with that. As a young man, I decided I wanted to learn to be a baker before I learned to be a flour miller. Why? Because they were my customers. That was a good logical decision. But at the same time, I really enjoyed all aspects of the complexity and the artistry associated with fermentation and baking and creating products that smelt so good and looked so good. Then I turned it around and went the other way. I was born and raised in Strathalbyn, still live there. At the local school I went, most of the kids there were either the butcher's son or the doctor's son, but most of them, or daughter, most of them were farmers' children. And so these were my mates. And so I wanted to learn farming as well. So I did, and I have, and I've continued to be involved. When I went to uni, I learned chemistry, microbiology. Does that make me a microbiologist? No, I'm just not afraid of long words. But the thing is that was to help me understand the processes of making food, because microbiology is everything. Microbiology is about the wheat plant sprouting and growing to maturity. That's microbiology. So I now have a deep interest, and I foster CSIRO with germplasm for new plants. I'm on all sorts of industry boards regarding GMO, non-GMO, all the way through to every form of food processing and production even malting and brewing. So I have a wide range of experience, and every one of those helps me in my own business because it helps me understand what consumers want, helps me understand what everybody in the supply chain wants, helps me help everybody get more value, make more money so they can invest more in making better quality, more reliability, happier consumers. So let's just go now to some mega trends, because you have to understand this. Because quite often, unless you broad ranging in how you gather knowledge, you don't understand, and you need to do this. Increasingly, I remember in the 1990s, I was told that Australia was going to run out of grain and would not export it anymore because so much was being fed to the livestock industry for feeding cattle for meat for Japan and overseas. What rubbish. We're still exporting 20 to 30 million tonnes of grain even now. So people will always find a way. But what's happening? The world is becoming more affluent. Whichever way you look at it, ignore what you read in the media about all the things that, I mean, if it's bad, they make it 10 times as bad. If it's good, they make it 10 times as good. The truth is halfway in between. Food is becoming more sophisticated as people want it to become more sophisticated. It is primal to us. We want nicer and better food. We want to enjoy food more. So there's legislative requirements in every country of the world, especially in Asian countries where they've had rapid economic development and all sorts of bad outcomes for people. Think of melamine in milk. And it's consumer preferences. They want stuff that's nice, that they feel good about. So the mega trend is that there's more people out there with more disposable income that are prepared to spend it on food. And I can explain why if you want me to. You can ask me questions. So what then are other trends that affect the viability of businesses and its ability to employ, recruit and pay good money to people? Slowing population growth across the world, and especially in Australia, because if affluence does that, the poorest countries have the highest birth rates. Australia's birth rate's actually shrinking all the time as we become more affluent, same around the world. So, more adults are spending more money on themselves. What do they spend it on? The ageing population is another very important one as well, because an ageing population indicates certain things, like more jobs for young people, right? So we're also seeing better communication, better distribution and much more internationalism, which I've spoken about before, migration, but better communication. You actually understand what's happening in the rest of the world because you can see it on your phone. Growing individual affluence means more discretionary expenditure. You can choose to spend that money where you want to. No one in Australia spends more than a fraction, actually, of their income on food. Remember, wars were created by people not having enough food. They were going hungry. That leads to wars. So, the thing is, what's happened with competing discretionary expenditure? Okay, I know people that spend more money on cigarettes than they do on food. What's the trend on smoking? I tell you. You all know yourself, people are smoking less because cigarettes are being made more expensive. It's being a social taboo. You're not allowed to smoke anymore with other people, and people look down on you, and everyone knows it's very bad for your health. So people are spending less money on one form of discretionary expenditure, which is smoking. Also, inappropriate alcoholic beverages. People are spending a lot less money on cheap booze. They're spending a lot more money on better quality booze for all sorts of good reasons, similar to food. What about the increasing costs associated with transport? It costs more money to run a vehicle and more money to buy the fuel and so on. So people are travelling less. So when they go on holidays, they don't travel as far in their own vehicle. Last one, terrorism is affecting tourism. So people are travelling less to other places. They're staying at home more. So where are they spending their money? They're spending it on food, and they're doing it around the world. I've checked this out in China. I've checked it out in Europe, America, and everywhere else. Yes, some people are spending an enormous amount of money on fast cars, but if you drive a fast car for very long, you don't drive it much anymore because you've lost your licence or they impound your car. Equally with tourism. So as a trend, people are spending more money on providing satisfaction for themselves by spending a lot more money on high quality food that they trust, that they enjoy. So that, you have to understand then, is what's creating investment in the food industry. So where then are the jobs? As soon as you watch TV, you can see that there's obviously, by the way, the TV cooking shows are reflecting the trend, aren't they? Because they're putting on TV the things that we're actually enjoying ourselves and we can relate to. So more people are spending more money on kitchens and more people are spending more money on food ingredients and so on. That's the hospitality side. But don't forget that every one of those things that are selected off a shelf have come and arrived there from, you can call it industry you like, I would prefer to say just other people creating it. So every piece of meat that you see has been an animal that's been fed grain or grass. There's thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs in each of these in Australia, in all these industries, and these industries want to expand and they cannot. The businesses want to grow and they can't because they can't get enough good people. They can't get enough food scientists. They can't get enough truck drivers. They can't get enough people to sweep floors. They can't get enough managers or supervisors. We are constrained by our lack of jobs. Yeah. Or not the lack of jobs, the jobs are there, we just can't get people to fill them. So, I'll give you an example. Everybody understands that the country areas of Australia are being depopulated as young people drift to the cities. Why they do that? Because young people always seek what is attractive and apparent to them, and they can and they do make choices. What we're seeing now is most farms in Australia, the average age of most farmers in Australia is now over 60 years old. I know farmers now that have trouble attracting workmen. When they do get a workman they can trust, they give them the share of the farm. They give them a share of the farm. That person then becomes a logical successor to own that farm. When the farmer dies, who do you think they're going to will it to? The prodigal son that's somewhere in Europe? No, to the workman that's working on this farm that the farmer has had for a couple of generations and so on. They are some of the opportunities. And it happens in restaurants, doesn't it? Exactly the same thing. Bakeries.
Okay. Final comment, Alastair.
We need to look to the future, and we talk about the digitised world, and 40% of the jobs which young people will go into haven't been created yet. That, to me, sums up the need to be very agile in understanding how to use e-commerce, the messaging which communicates on the phone. WeChat, 980 million people transact on WePhone in all types of different fashions. The way in which we use information, the way we absorb information, the way we make decisions is all based on electronic information. So the way in which we need to, I guess, position ourselves, particularly for those who are coming into the workspace, is to understand how digitisation, electronic messaging can assist you and the companies which are yet to be formed in profiting in the marketplace. In a small way, we're involved in that area. We're a vertically integrated company. We have a traceability product called Osiris and another authenticity app called brand Laucke, which means that a purchaser in Shanghai, knowing that 6 products in her shopping trolley are fake, and that's the general average, she, and I'm being sexist here, she, will want to know whether she's buying something which is authentic and it's going to be good for her family. And she can do that through Osiris, which is an app which on the phone hooks back to our server. It goes tick, tick, tick on all the items about the day that came into the shop, how it was transported, the cold chain management, indeed all the way through transportation right back to the farm. We've got it now to the point where we can per day of batching. It can come down to per farm, and you can do podcasts on that particular farmer and indeed identify the cow because of the amount of milk coming through on that day through that batch. So that authenticity trail is there. That's all because that information has been captured and is being made available to consumers who want to value their lifestyle. One small example, but it's where the world's going. You need to be... there's a great market for people who are knowledge managers and can understand consumer requirements. Equally, building on the points Mark has talked about, there is a real shortage of really skilled, trained people. Our cheesemakers in the factories we've got down at Murray Bridge and Jervois, they produce wonderful cheese, but on average they're about 35 years old. These are cheesemakers who want to pass on their craft, want to pass on their recipes and their trade craft. There's nobody out there, or there's a deficit. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how good would it be to introduce young people, young businesses into a company like ourselves or in some type of partnering arrangement, so those skills and knowledge can be passed on and there's sustainability and the ecosystem of South Australia's food community. So the future's all out there, and to a lot of ways, a lot of people have been sceptical about South Australia, but I think it can find a salvation and a leg up through our food industries.
Absolutely. And I suppose the sort of final message really is the food processing and manufacturing industry, hospitality, linking in with tourism. You can be an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer, a marketer, a manager, a food technologist, a project manager, a farmer, someone in operations, in IT, or a translator. Just about every job that exists now and into the future is applicable to the industry. So I'd like to very much thank the three of our panellists. Thank you, Simon, Mark and Alastair, and thanks for attending.